University of Wisconsin. My guest today, Sean Broderick, is the executive director of Techstars Cambridge.
Good evening. Welcome to Crime Time. I'm Frank.
So, I'm here. Welcome to the Progressive Revolt. This is your host, Plinio de Goes. As usual, we have a guest. Today's guest is a very special guest. His name is Cole, and I got an appropriate theme song today. The theme song for this week is Billy. Like I said, today's guest is Cole from Mass Peace Action. Cole, why don't you take a second to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I'm Cole Harrison. I'm the main staff person for Mass Peace Action. We are a 58-year-old peace group. Used to be called Sane Freeze. We were founded in the early days of the nuclear age, when we were part of the Ban the Bomb movement, when everyone realized that atomic weapons were dangerous, incredibly dangerous to everyone. So that's our signature issue. That's our foundational issue. We're still calling for abolition of nuclear weapons today. But we branched out into a variety of other related peace issues. We oppose wars and occupations that the United States does. And we also call for cutting the military budget and shifting those funds to fund the many things that our society needs. You know, we have terrible problems with inequality in our country. We even have problems keeping the T running. We have problems with education, infrastructure. We have many, many millions of people in this country that don't have jobs. And there are real needs that need to be met with those funds. And yet we are wasting so many billions and billions of dollars modernizing our nuclear weapons, which must never be used, and the priorities are way off. So that's some of the stuff that Mass Peace Action cares about. We're part of a national network of peace action groups. Actually, Peace Action is the largest grassroots peace group in the country, and so that's what we do. We got a little office in a church basement in Cambridge, so we're happy to be on CCTV.
And how do people get involved with Mass Peace Action if they want to reach you?
They can go to masspeaceaction.org. They can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We have a couple of events coming up this fall. We have a big conference on sustainable security. Our national security narrative is all off in this country, where we're taught to be scared, to be fearful. To be afraid that somebody's coming to get us. And so we have bases in more than 100 foreign countries. We are right now involved in a shooting war in a number of countries, most notably in Iraq and Syria, but also in Yemen, in Pakistan, Afghanistan. They say that the special forces are actually active in 45 countries now, and that's just what we know about. Sorry, I forgot where I was going with that train of thought.
I mean, and also, people sometimes think of this as a lefty issue, and this is obviously the Progressive Revolt. So all of us here who come on this program tend to be from that persuasion. But there's also, if you're someone who's into constitutionalism and strict constitutionalism, the founding fathers obviously had a vision that they didn't want to have a standing army in the country at all. Is that correct?
That's right. They said that Jefferson said a standing army would lead to tyranny. And in many ways, Jefferson was right about that. So once the Second World War happened, the United States flipped over. It never had a standing army before World War II. But now we've had a military-industrial complex ever since then. a large, large industrial number of companies that are totally devoted to military production and a large standing army occupying all over the world. And arguably, they have taken over the government. They are so powerful that it really doesn't matter who's president or who's in Congress. They just keep on going. It ranges from the Defense Department to the CIA to the NSA, and a lot of the senators in Congress are in it. Some of the academia and media are in it. And the military-industrial complex is so powerful in our country that we really need citizens to stand up to it. Even in the Republican debate last week, although most of them are cheerleaders for their
war with Iran.
We saw that Rand Paul was out there complaining that the Iraq War had been a failure and that we shouldn't be doing things like that anymore. We disagree with Rand Paul on many issues, but at least we're glad to see some dissent within the Republican Party as well on this.
And I think you're talking about decreasing the military budget. I mean, when we talk about military bases overseas, my understanding is that these military bases are there for the purposes of securing the flow of goods across nations, and so it's there to basically for the purpose of corporate globalization, really.
That is so true, Plinio, because we have a globalized production system. I always show, one moment, I have a prop. This phone was made in over 50 countries. In other words, I don't mean the same phone is made in 50 different countries. I mean there are parts of this phone, like the little transistor and the little this and the little that. And so Apple Computer sells this product in 150 countries rather. And so they have orchestrated a production system covering the entire globe, where Malaysia produces one thing, Mexico produces one thing, Cupertino, California produces one thing, and it's a global system. And that system requires a stable security environment. That's their terms, not mine, in order to function. And so that's the fundamental role of that U.S. military complex. The U.S. is a specialist in military. There are a lot of capitalist countries, but the U.S. is a specialist in military power. And it falls to the United States to make sure that whenever any country in the world wants to depart from that system, it doesn't want to be part of that whole, I'm just singling out Apple Computer because it is, partly because I have a phone in my pocket. It's also the biggest company in the world now in terms of market value. But the whole capitalist system works that way now on a global scale. And when any country has a different idea, wants a different system, it doesn't matter whether it's a socialist system or an Islamic republic or the ISIS system. Let's go back to the days of the Prophet Muhammad.
Sure.
Anybody who wants to leave that system and do something different is a big problem. Not necessarily because their own country is the total problem, but because they would set an example that any country could do its own thing. And so that has to be stopped. So they'll try various means to stop that kind of departure from the neoliberal globalized economy. They will try funding the political opposition. They'll try sabotage. And then gradually, if that doesn't work, they will actually send in the Marines or the drones and try to overthrow the government. And that's what we're dealing with.
So basically what you're saying is that the U.S. taxpayer actually, to some degree, subsidizes corporations by not only with lives in terms of military occupation, but with dollars in terms, and those dollars carry opportunity costs that you were talking about as well.
You bet. And what you're doing is enriching those corporations that then come back to the United States and oppress the American worker. We were singing the union song a minute ago.
That's right.
The unions are going down in this country, and they've got their backs up against the wall because the corporations are so powerful, because they operate on a global scale, but labor cannot operate on a global scale. Labor operates on the national scale and is totally outflanked. And of course, we've been talking about runaway shops in this country for decades. And whenever labor pushes for something, they'll just move production somewhere else. So they're just like, countries are just like a puppet on a string to these companies.
And our culture itself is shaped by that sort of corporate mentality. I mean, I'm looking at myself here today, and before I came here, I was at an event where I was speaking with regards to some of the political stuff I'm doing in terms of stuff that doesn't involve mass peace action at all. And because I was speaking in front of a group of people, I decided that I had to dress well, so I put on this polo shirt. And this polo shirt, is itself is it's a symbol of greed, but I myself as a guy who's running as a progressive here, I felt into this culture because I need to show that I'm a serious individual and so on.
That's right.
And so even I'm pulled into it, and so you have this self-reproducing mechanism of violence.
That's right. And we all have to we're faced with having to buy into that ideology of consumerism, of success, and getting ahead.
So what's the alternative, Cole? How do we solve the issue, and what is Mass Peace Action's platform as far as what's better?
Well, it's going to take a broad people's movement. We see the peace movement as connected to all the other issues in society. So we need a broad progressive movement to challenge the corporate domination. And that has to be done in the political sphere, but it also has to be done in the educational sphere in terms of reaching people where they are in the streets. So we see peace as one part of a progressive coalition. So what we really see Peace Action's role is to specialize on the peace issues and go deep when it comes to the Syria war or the Iran deal or the nuclear weapons issues or the military budget. Bring the information, educate people, and show the connections between those peace issues and the other progressive issues so that the progressive movement can get its act together and confront that outflanking that I talked about earlier. Sometimes we actually have had, I was just talking to Mike a few minutes ago, we've had an upsurge of progressive organizing in this country since the crash in about 2009. We've had the Occupy, we've had Black Lives Matter, we've had the gigantic climate movement, and so on. And and also Fight for 15 on the economic level. So these are signs of hope. These are signs that people are getting protest and moving forward. But sometimes those protest movements do not look at the big enough picture. And our concern is that the international dimension is so important, and that those economic struggles for justice are going to get outflanked if they don't see the big picture. So we're actually calling a conference in November at Harvard Law School, which will be called Sustainable Security, in which we're going to bring in representatives from not only the peace movement, but also from Raise Up Massachusetts, which is campaigning on economic justice issues, and 350 Mass, which is campaigning on climate issues, and ACLU, which is campaigning on racial justice, and Jobs Not Jails, which is talking about mass incarceration, to show all the connections between all these issues and put it all together. And the keynote will be Noam Chomsky, who has been talking this interconnection stuff for decades, and he'll get us off in the right direction.
And just to
November 21st at Harvard Law.
November 21st, Harvard Law, and you can go on Mass Peace Action's website, and you can get that information there. I just want to take a second to recognize Beth Weinstein, who watches this show regularly, and want to throw in. I had a discussion with Beth over email, and she mentioned that she's a transgender veteran. She made her two biggest decisions in her life were, number one, to sign up to go to Vietnam, she said, and then number two was to change her identity. And she mentioned that she couldn't live in Cambridge anymore because the rents had risen and so on. And we had a discussion, and Beth, if you recall, you said that you did not see how the environmental struggle was tied in some way to the struggle for peace, because you've been to Vietnam and you've seen that the horrors there, and you expressed that to me. So I was wondering, Cole, if you could maybe address someone like Beth and say, what's the tie between war and climate change? What's the relationship?
Well, there are many, but to start with, the military itself is one of the biggest polluters on the planet. Those super duper jets that they fly all over the place, they use up more fossil fuel per second than you can name. But also, the whole mission of the military is to preserve the fossil fuel system. Why do you think we had a war in Iraq? Plenty of people said that it was, we used to protest and say no blood for oil. And that was because we knew that the mission of the military in the Middle East was to assure the supply of oil. So
And,
here's the
and
United States.
let's take that into a little more detail. I think because I think a lot of people don't realize that Saddam Hussein was actually intercepting to some degree oil shipments. Is that correct? It was alleged that he was.
Don't know about that. Actually, Saddam Hussein probably was quite willing to sell us the oil. It was really just a struggle of who would control the oil revenues and the destiny of the oil, who could turn on or off the oil supply.
Okay.
It was a power struggle among polluters, if you will. But at least that's how I see it. But that from the U.S. economy point of view, which is totally dependent on a fossil fuel system, and they make no bones about that, they must control the Middle East. And of course, now they're so excited that they've developed fracking in other ways. Now they're going to pump up in the Arctic Ocean and pollute the atmosphere up there. Pollute the environment up there. They are so excited that now the United States will be self-sufficient, will be able to pump as much oil as it can on its own. But the military is the last guarantor of the economic system, and our capitalist economic system is totally dependent on fossil fuel. And in the words of Naomi Klein, it's capitalism versus the climate. And that's what we're dealing with. That's what we're up against.
So let's talk a little bit about Cambridge. All of the folks watching are from Cambridge.
Yeah.
What can be done here in Cambridge, and what are the issues in Cambridge?
I do have one Cambridge issue, which some of our researchers figured out. Draper Labs, which is right over in Kendall Square, is where the guidance system for the Navy's nuclear missiles have been designed. And they've always been designed there, but now the Draper Lab has new contracts to further modernize that system so that the nuclear missiles on the Navy subs will be impervious to counterattack. Will be able to will hit the target and explode correctly, even if there are other explosions in the area and so on. So we have a large engineering firm in East Cambridge, Draper Labs, which is being funded by taxpayer dollars to make weapons whose purpose is to exterminate. If those weapons were ever fired, if the missiles on a nuclear submarine were ever used, it would be the end of human civilization. People don't realize this. We think a weapon will keep us safe. That was the original thought, but they have become so powerful that if they shot those weapons at Russia, which is supposedly the nuclear adversary, and if Russia shot its weapons back, the destruction would be so vast that it would throw dirt and stuff into the atmosphere to the extent that it would blot out the sun. Not for an hour, not for a day, but for a year. Agriculture would end, and billions would die in a nuclear winter. So that's what the Draper Lab is working on, to enable a nuclear winter. And that's what our taxpayer funds are supporting our engineers and scientists to do. We need our engineers and scientists to be working on things for people. We do need more technological progress on energy, for example, to deal with climate change, don't we? We need better trains and transportation and a lot of things. And those engineers should not be working on destroying the planet.
Hasn't there, because there used to be protests outside of Draper Labs, right, in Cambridge?
Yes.
And there used to be there used to be massive protests here during the 80s, I think, in Cambridge. To some degree, have people grown complacent because of the end of the Cold War, that they assume, oh, you know what, have they made that kind of, I don't want to say stupid, but I'll say stupid. Have they made that kind of stupid mistake of saying, the Cold War is over, this isn't a risk anymore, so we don't have to protest and hit the streets anymore?
Well, I think that's true. It's not in the headlines as much. But again, the media manipulates and points our direction in certain directions, and we don't think about what the real dangers are. There's still a lot of hostility, and actually renewed hostility, between the U.S. and Russia now. There's a confrontation in Ukraine. There's a confrontation in Syria, though they're talking about maybe they'll work together in Syria. But there's danger in the hostility between U.S. and Russia still. There are also other countries with nuclear weapons that can pose a threat. So we really have to get together and abolish nuclear weapons to have any chance of a safe life. on earth. And yes, people have become complacent. Let's take the Iran deal, which was, we support the Iran deal. We worked very hard to make sure it was passed. We're pleased that all 11 members of the Massachusetts congressional delegation finally supported the Iran deal, though it took several of them until the last day before they made up their mind. But they supported it. But the rhetoric they used to defend the Iran deal is absolutely wrong. They're trying to put Iran in a penalty box and saying our deal is the best way to punish Iran. Well, Iran isn't a threat. Iran doesn't have any nuclear weapons. We are the country with the most nuclear weapons, we and Russia. And in the Middle East, Israel has nuclear weapons. Pakistan has nuclear weapons. It isn't Iran that is a nuclear threat to anyone. So the whole thing is completely hyped up, and people are confused about what the real problem is.
And if non-state actors did obtain nuclear weapons, they might get them actually from sources like Russia if we don't get engaged in multilateral negotiations to decrease both of our arsenals. Is that right?
Yeah, it's got to be done worldwide. The U.S. and Russia have the most, so they have the biggest responsibility. And under President Obama, there was a START treaty with Russia that did reduce the ceilings significantly, but it was still just a first step, and they have not really taken another step since 2010 when they signed the new START treaty. There really should be a nuclear weapons convention in which all the nations of the world work together to gradually reduce and then eliminate all nuclear weapons. And so far the United States has refused to consider that possibility. The Non-Proliferation Treaty, which we signed, committed us to do that, and we haven't done it.
Is the opposition by a specific political party or group, or is it distributed among both parties? How does it work as far as opposition to?
Well, the Democrats they vacillate. Actually, President Obama is against nuclear weapons, has said so many times, but he doesn't feel like he has enough political space to really do that much about it. Of course, the Republicans are adamant, except with a couple of exceptions, maybe Rand Paul or a couple of libertarians. The great bulk of Republicans are absolutely dead set against any reduction in U.S. military strength, and many of them want to increase it. I guess Carly Fiorina last week wanted to greatly expand our military spending.
What would be the argument, given the fact that there are already enough nukes to destroy essentially the planet several times over? What would be the argument to actually add nuclear weapons? How could you make that argument?
Well, they're not really trying to add to the numbers, but they're trying to modernize them so that they'll be even more accurate and even more reliable.
How many nuclear weapons would you need to, let's say, destroy the world as a whole?
About 200, although actually as scientists advances, they keep reducing that number, saying, well, the closer we look, because they used to think about 1,000, the latest studies is now about 200. So full-scale nuclear exchange between India and Pakistan, which have much smaller arsenals and much simpler than the U.S. and Russia do, would be enough to create a nuclear winter that would destroy human agriculture.
So how many nuclear weapons does the U.S. have right now?
We have 8,000, of which 1,500 are deployed strategic and active on hair trigger alert, ready to be fired at any moment.
So if you need 200 weapons to destroy the world, and you have
Right.
8,000 weapons, you'd be able to destroy the world 400 times
Something like that, yeah.
at this point in time, roughly.
40 times, whatever it is.
Whatever it is.
More
That's
than-
more than
more than
100.
enough, more than enough.
So the argument, I guess, to some degree, this ties into corporate welfare as well, doesn't it not? I mean,
That's right, and these are no bid contracts. They are secret, so even the Congress cannot see the contract and cannot see the reports on whether the labs did the work right or anything. So there's people just making out like bandits on this military. It's all classified, and it's an enormous source of profits for the military-industrial complex.
so it might surprise you, but we actually have two staunch Republicans who do regularly watch this show.
Nice.
Despite the fact this is the Progressive Revolt, we do have two Republicans who regularly watch and criticize and are very active in terms of local politics. And their argument is, of course, that the U.S. has to assert a leadership position, because if it doesn't, another country will, and that country will be worse than the U.S., and you'll have much more violence globally. Do you come across people who make that argument, and how do you respond to it?
Right. because some people think the United States is uniquely gifted and a democratic country. They call it American exceptionalism. And every presidential candidate must say that America is the greatest nation in the world and is the light among nations and the city on a hill and all this rhetoric. Well, in fact, the United States is self-interested, just like any other country, and is not more able to solve these problems than any other. It does a lot of stupid things, and I'm not one of those that thinks that everything the United States does is some big conspiracy. Half the time it's complete folly, but nevertheless they keep on trying to increase their power. But it's not helping the people of the United States when they do that. It's just helping a small elite, a corporate elite that really rules our country. So really, to answer your Republican viewers, it's necessary to go over to a polycentric world. That we need the contributions of many countries and civilizations and cultures to have a more democratic future. The UN has to be reformed. Instead of the old five, we need more countries part of that. We need China. We need socialist countries. We need Islamic countries, Latin America, and on to be part of the world governance and international organizations.
So we only have about 45 seconds left. I just want to take the time to thank Cole for coming by and encourage people to get involved with Mass Peace Action. That goes for you Republicans as well. Hopefully you've changed your minds.
We're a
or
nonpartisan organization.
they're nonpartisan.
Republicans, libertarians, liberals, and socialists, and you name it.
And Cole just said that Rand Paul has been good as far as some of these issues. So even you guys can get involved with this and take a look at it. And I just wanted to take the time to just thank Cole for coming by and to remind you guys that if you want to get in touch with them, to go to the Mass Peace Action website. They have some events coming up. And you can find those on their website. Next week, the Progressive Revolt will be back with another guest, and we'll be discussing other issues, mostly Cambridge-based. But let's not forget to tune in next week. We're going to be talking about